Well, I like sex, but I...
Well, they always put that symbol. They always put that symbol on somebody who becomes successful in pictures, the new sex goddess or sex symbol. Does it rankle you a little bit?
Not anymore.
To the world, she was the ultimate Hollywood sex symbol. Beautiful, glamorous, and desired by millions. But behind the flashing cameras and red carpet smiles was a woman living a very different reality. She walked down the aisle 4 times, hoping each marriage would finally bring the love and happiness she longed for. Instead, every relationship left behind heartbreak, disappointment, and unanswered questions. Trapped by her public image and struggling to find genuine love, she faced a series of painful personal battles that few people ever saw. How could a woman admired by so many be so unlucky in love? And what really happened behind the scenes of her 4 failed marriages? In today's video, we're uncovering the emotional and often shocking story that Hollywood tried to keep hidden. She was born Jo Raquel Tejada on a September morning in 1940 in Chicago, Illinois. A name the world would barely remember because the name she'd carry into history was borrowed from a man she married young, before she truly knew herself. Her father had come all the way from Bolivia, a man of precision and ambition. Her mother was of English-American stock, composed and grounded. Between those two worlds, a daughter was born who would spend her entire life straddling contradictions she never chose. The family settled in San Diego, and it was there that the girl who would become Raquel Welch began quietly transforming. She took up ballet at just 7 years old, training with a discipline most children couldn't fathom. By her teenage years, she was winning beauty pageants, including Miss San Diego, not because she sought fame, but because something about her simply refused to be overlooked. Hollywood, when she finally arrived, was not kind. There were small parts, dead-end auditions, and a studio system that looked at a woman with a Bolivian father and quietly suggested she bury her roots, become something more palatable. She complied for a time. Most people did. Then came 1966, and everything changed in the most bittersweet of ways. 1 million years, BC, gave her almost nothing to say. Just a prehistoric fur bikini and one iconic image. That photograph traveled the world before the film ever did. Overnight, she became a global sensation. Not for a performance or anything she'd worked and sacrificed for. Just an image, a poster, a figure millions projected their fantasies onto, while the real woman stood somewhere just behind it, unseen. She refused to be buried by it. She delivered performances in Fantastic Voyage, Bandolero, Myra Breckinridge, and The Three Musketeers, for which she won a Golden Globe, proving she had genuine range. In 1971, she led Hannie Calder, one of the first revenge westerns ever carried by a woman alone. Quentin Tarantino would later cite it as a direct inspiration for Kill Bill, a legacy she was never quite given enough credit for. She never did nude scenes, despite relentless industry pressure. In an era when the male gaze dictated a woman's worth in cinema, that refusal was not just personal, it was political. Off-screen, her personal life told a quieter, lonelier story. 4 marriages, each carrying its own weight of hope and disappointment. She once admitted with hard-won honesty that she was simply never very good at it. In her later years, she rebuilt herself as an entrepreneur. Wigs, beauty lines, fitness programs, becoming a symbol of aging with grace and ferocity. But behind every reinvention, there was always that original question, the one that followed her from San Diego to Hollywood to Broadway. Who was she really beyond what the world decided to see? She spent a lifetime answering it. And the tragedy, and the beauty, is that most people never thought to ask. She was 18 years old when she walked down the aisle in Las Vegas, young, hopeful, and still years away from becoming the woman the world would obsess over. James Welch was her high school sweetheart, and in the spring of 1959, that felt like enough. By the end of that same year, she was a mother. A second child followed in 1961. For a brief moment, it looked like an ordinary life. But ordinary was never really on the cards for her. The pressures of early marriage, young motherhood, and an ambition that refused to stay quiet slowly fractured what they had built together. They separated in 1962, and by 1964, it was officially over. Yet she kept his name, Welch, carrying it with her through every film, every headline, every reinvention, all the way until her final days in 2023. It was the name the world knew, and so it stayed. Her second marriage arrived wrapped in romance. On Valentine's Day, 1967, she wed Patrick Curtis in Paris, a city, a date, a setting almost too cinematic to be real. Curtis was her publicist, her manager, her strategist. He understood the machinery of Hollywood fame and helped engineer the very image that made her a global icon. But behind the polished exterior, the relationship was unraveling. By 1972, it was over. What followed became the stuff of legend and tabloid mythology. Reports from the Spanish press alleged a passionate affair with actor Sancho Gracia during the 1968 filming of 100 Rifles on location in Spain. The story claimed that when Curtis discovered the relationship, he pursued Gracia through a hotel corridor, armed and furious. A scene more dramatic than anything either of them had ever filmed. Welch never confirmed it. She never had to. The story took on a life of its own. Through the 1970s, her name was romantically linked to some of the era's most magnetic men: football icon Joe Namath, Hollywood power broker Robert Evans, and the brilliantly troubled young comedian Freddie Prinze, whose death by suicide in 1977 sent a quiet grief through everyone who had known him. None of these relationships was ever officially confirmed by Welch herself. She kept her private life exactly that, private, and in doing so, made it all the more fascinating. If her second marriage had been a Hollywood production, her third felt more like a European art film, slower, more textured, and ultimately more heartbreaking. On a sun-drenched July day in 1980, she married Andre Weinfeld in the coastal beauty of Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. He was French-American, a former journalist turned filmmaker, and he brought with him a quiet sophistication that seemed to complement her in ways her previous relationships hadn't. This one lasted a decade, longer than anything that came before it, and for a time, it looked as though she had finally found solid ground. She pulled back from Hollywood's relentless pace, channeling her energy into fitness videos, beauty ventures, and the kind of private life she had always been denied. Then, in February of 1983, came a loss that no amount of public composure could fully conceal. While vacationing in the Caribbean, she suffered a miscarriage 3 months into a pregnancy. The grief was real, and it was deep. Some wounds don't fully close. By 1990, the marriage was over. The early 90s passed quietly. Then, in 1996, she surfaced in the tabloids again, this time on the arm of British actor and former boxing champion Gary Stretch, a man so much younger than her that he was actually younger than both of her own children. They appeared together at events, vibrant and unapologetic. But like so much in her romantic life, it burned bright and faded. Her fourth and final marriage came in the summer of 1999, in a warm ceremony at her Beverly Hills home. Richard Palmer was a New York entrepreneur, grounded and far removed from the film world she had spent decades navigating. It seemed perhaps like a deliberate choice, someone from a different world entirely. But the differences that may have initially attracted them ultimately pulled them apart. They separated in 2003, and the divorce was finalized the following year. 4 marriages, 4 genuine attempts at something lasting. She once said, with the kind of quiet candor that only experience teaches, that she was simply never very good at it. She wasn't wrong, but she kept trying. And there is something quietly heroic and achingly human about that. By 2011, she had made a quiet decision. No more marriages. In an interview that year, she spoke plainly about wanting independence, about the toll that compromise takes on a person over time, about finally being at peace with her own company. It sounded like closure, and perhaps it was. Yet even then, life had one more connection to offer. In the early years of that decade, she was quietly linked to Nigel Lithgow, the prominent British television producer behind some of America's most watched entertainment. Neither of them said much publicly, but those who knew them spoke of something genuine, an intellectual ease, an emotional warmth that didn't need a headline to validate it. And then, near the very end, she told the truth about something she had carried for decades. At 82 years old, Raquel Welch finally gave a name to the love she had never publicly claimed. It was Ernest Borgnine, Academy Award winner, Hollywood veteran, a man nearly 2 decades her senior, and about as far from the glossy sex symbol world as it was possible to get. Rugged where she was glamorous, unassuming where she was iconic, and yet, she said, he was the one. Their bond had begun the way many deep connections do, slowly, quietly, on the edges of professional life. Film sets, industry gatherings, shared moments that accumulated into something neither of them could easily name or neatly categorize. She had other marriages, other relationships that the press dissected endlessly. But none of them, she confessed, reached the place inside her that he did. What kept them from a conventional life together was never fully explained. Timing, circumstance, the particular cruelty of 2 lives that ran parallel but never quite merged. She described him as a stabilizing force, someone who saw past the image, past the fur bikini and the Golden Globe and the magazine covers, and recognized the woman underneath who simply wanted to be known. Borgnine passed away in 2012. She outlived him by 11 years, carrying that unspoken chapter a little longer before finally letting it breathe. Raquel Welch died peacefully on February 15, 2023, at her home in Los Angeles. She was 82. The cause was cardiac arrest, a heart that had, by every account, felt more than most people ever allow themselves to. She spent a lifetime being seen. It took until the very end for her to be truly understood. And in that final confession, quiet, unhurried, and achingly honest, she gave the world something more valuable than any image she had ever created. She gave them the truth. She sat across from one of America's most beloved talk show hosts, wearing a dress her husband had picked out, a blouse she'd had made longer on a whim. And before she even settled into her chair, the introduction had already done it. The biggest sex symbol in motion pictures. She heard it. She always heard it. And for a long time, it stung. In her own words, she admitted that in the early days the label used to make her a little perturbed. There was, she said, a stereotyped idea attached to it. The assumption that a sex symbol was somehow vapid, not too bright, not particularly talented. A woman with a body and nothing else behind her eyes. She felt it everywhere she went. That invisible ceiling the image imposed. As she put it herself, it made you feel limited, and so you fight against it. But then came the quiet revelation that would define how she carried herself for the rest of her career. You can't fight an image. You can't control it. It belongs to the public the moment they decide it does. So she stopped fighting and started outworking it instead. When industry figures pressured her to lean fully into the fantasy, to strip it down, to give the audience more of what they wanted, she declined every time. On the subject of Playboy, she was characteristically dry. They had enough candidates to fill the book each month without her joining the ranks. If the glamorous image had already attached itself to her name, doing layouts would simply be, as she put it herself, gilding the lily. She didn't need to prove what everyone already assumed. What she needed to prove was everything else. She later reflected that while so many things were going for her, the sex symbol label came loaded with deeply stereotypical opinions about her abilities and who she truly was as a person. But she endured. Golden Globe, Broadway, a business empire built from the ground up, a 6-decade career that outlasted every prediction made about her. She acknowledged that America had always had its sex symbols, that it was a time-honored tradition, and that she was flattered to have been one, but was honest that building a serious, lasting career once that stereotype had been applied was genuinely hard. Her pride, she said simply, was that she endured. And she did. Long after the fur bikini faded into museum glass, long after the cameras moved on to younger faces, Raquel Welch remained, sharp, self-aware, and utterly unwilling to be reduced to a poster. The symbol was what the world made her. The woman was entirely her own. There is a particular cruelty in the way Alzheimer's disease chooses its victims. It does not take the body first. It takes the self, the memories, the recognition, the accumulated story of a life lived fully and fiercely. For a woman whose identity had been so visually, so publicly constructed over 6 decades, the slow erosion of that inner world was perhaps the most heartbreaking final chapter imaginable. In her last years, the disease quietly dismantled what time alone could not. The woman who had sparred with Hollywood executives, outlasted 4 marriages, built a business empire, and bared her soul in a final confession about the man she truly loved, that woman was gradually becoming unreachable, even to those who loved her most. On February 15, 2023, her heart stopped. She was at home, which means something. It means she was surrounded by the familiar, by people who knew her not as an icon, but as a person. In the end, that is what most of us hope for. Cardiac arrest was the medical verdict. But the fuller truth is that her body had been carrying a heavy weight for years, the compounding toll of age, of illness, of a mind slowly folding inward. She had endured so much with such visible strength that the world perhaps forgot she was mortal at all. The glamour was real. The Golden Globe was real. The fur bikini, the Broadway stage, the business empire, all of it real. But so was this. The quiet room, the failing heart, the mind that had already begun its long goodbye before the rest of her followed. She had spent a lifetime being reduced to an image. In death, she was returned to something far more universal. A human being who loved, who lost, who suffered, and who endured for as long as she possibly could. The light that defined an era finally went out. But lights like hers don't simply disappear. They linger. In the films, in the memories, in every person she ever made feel seen.